Hi, I'm Amanda Gumbert. I'm an Extension Specialist for Water Quality at the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. And we're going to talk a little bit about stream buffers and how we can use stream buffers to reduce erosion and protect water quality. So to start with, let's think about what stream buffers are. Stream buffers can be called a variety of things. Could also be called riparian buffers, streamside buffer zones, but they basically are just a transitional area in the landscape between a water body and an upland land use. Buffers contain a mixture of vegetation, typically trees, shrubs, and grasses or flowering plants. So optimally, we would have 3 zones in our buffers. Closest to the stream, we would have larger trees. Those trees would help, the roots would help hold soil in place. And then the upper branches and the canopy would shade the stream and keep the water in a stream or water body cool. Back from that larger zone, the second zone, would be a shrub or small tree zone. And then even farther back, the third zone would be grasses and forbs. So forbs meaning things that are maybe flowering plants, perennials, those kind of things. So those 3 zones then act together to give us the maximum benefits from our buffer zones. Now, one way that you can use a buffer zone is as part of your Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan. And so this picture shows an example of a buffer that's used in a livestock setting. And we have fencing, we have wire fencing that's restricting livestock access. We have a designated stream crossing, so a place where we would use for equipment crossing or for animal crossing. And then we also have a mixture of some small trees and grasses. Now, sometimes folks don't really like how these buffers look. They think they look wild and woolly or really unkept, or ugly. I've heard that description too. And so folks get a little nervous about putting that in the landscape. But there are a variety of ways that we can establish those buffers and how we can maintain them. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But let's first talk about the benefits of stream buffers. And so stream buffers protect our stream banks from erosion. And that's probably the most important thing and the most important benefit that we can get from stream buffers. We use the roots of plants. Those can be trees, shrubs, and grasses. And of course, they have different root structures, and they can all work together to hold soil in place, because we want to maintain our soil resources. You paid a lot of money for your farm, and you certainly don't want it to wash away just because you didn't take care of your stream banks. Stream buffers filter runoff. So as it rains on your farm, and we have rain that doesn't infiltrate into the soil, and we have surface runoff, that runoff then enters into our streams and water bodies. And so having a buffer in place gives an opportunity for that water to infiltrate and also to drop out contaminants that might be in there. So that's the filtering part. So not only do our roots act as filters in the soil, but the stems of the plants also act as filters as well. So they can slow water down, and water that is carrying sediment can drop the sediment out before that gets into the stream itself. Buffers can also uptake excess nutrients. So nutrients that may be traveling along with the runoff water, they could be attached to a soil particle, or maybe they're in dissolved form. Having that buffer in place gives an opportunity for another plant community to take up excess nutrients so that those don't get into our water resources. Another benefit we can get from stream buffers is reduced flood damage. So if we have an opportunity for runoff water from a rain event that it can infiltrate the soil, then we have less water that's moving downstream. And also we can hold that water there. It can help to recharge groundwater resources. But we're not sending this wall of water downstream, which then in turn will create more stream bank erosion downstream. I mentioned this before, that having tall trees in the buffer can help shade the stream. And so shading a stream will help regulate the temperature of the water. That's important for all those critters, all those macroinvertebrates. Those are the insects that we can see with our eyes that maybe live under rocks and in crevices in the stream, and they form the basis of a healthy ecosystem in a stream. And so shading that stream will regulate water temperature and we'll have a healthier insect population, aquatic insect population, and that helps to produce a better ecosystem and greater fishing opportunities. So if you're a fisherman, then you'll appreciate that. Buffers also provide wildlife habitat. And I sometimes get pushback from farmers. They think, oh my gosh, we're going to attract lots of pest wildlife into the landscape, whereas if I keep it clean, if I keep it mowed, then there's not going to be a place for anything to live. And while it can be true that sometimes we'll bring in pests that may browse your crop field, most of the time what I'm really thinking about is we're creating wildlife habitat for beneficial organisms. So think about like ecological pest control. So you're thinking about predators, birds, bats, other insects that are going to help control the pest insects that would put pressure on our crops. So I'm thinking in terms of creating habitat for those beneficial insects and even habitat for pollinators. And pollinators are especially important in our agricultural ecosystems. So the next couple slides are just some pictures of healthy stream buffers, and then we'll take a look at some that aren't so healthy. So in this case, we have a stream that is shaded by kind of medium-sized trees, and then you also see grasses as well. So we have a nice diversity of plants, and a diversity of above-ground plants gives us diversity in root structures below ground. This is an example of a landscape that had previously been mowed. So the stream bank was mowed right to the edge, probably with a string trimmer to make sure that you were able to get down in there and control weeds. But this particular landscape is adjacent to a crop field, and it was allowed to go unmowed for 2 growing seasons. And you see all the things that are in bloom that have a variety of colors. Those are things that were in the seed bank. And so while this doesn't have shading for the water in the stream, it does provide some wildlife habitat and some root diversity because we have plant diversity in this particular landscape. And sometimes when folks will go, well, that's just a bunch of weeds. And I kind of think, weeds are maybe in the eye of the beholder. So I look at these plants and see some native plants that are flowering that provide habitat for pollinators. So again, this is that picture we previously saw in a livestock landscape. So this is a stream buffer that was established between 2 pastures or 2 areas where we've got pasture-based livestock. And we do have a bit of variety here. We have a large tree that's outside the buffer, but we have some grasses. This is newly established. So over time, some of those smaller, medium-sized trees, if they're allowed to grow, then they will provide a little bit of shade for this stream. This is an example of an unhealthy stream buffer. Although we do have a tree on one bank, the other bank has some pretty severe erosion going on. And so this is a situation where we have clipped the vegetation to the edge, whether that be by livestock or whether by just mowing the hay from this field. And we don't have strong root systems to hold the soil in place. And you can kind of see there where the grasses are kind of slumping off over that stream bank, and you can see the bank starting to erode. When we have that situation, we're eroding our soil. We're sending soil downstream that can cause damage downstream, but also we're losing our valuable soil resources that should belong on our own farm. This is another example of an unhealthy stream buffer, an example where the landowner has used the buffer as an area for winter feeding of their livestock, and you can see the rutting as well as the foot traffic damage from the livestock, and you see a very muddy condition, and in a heavy rainfall event, we'll get flooding. That stream will get out of its banks and it'll carry that mud and manure with it downstream. And that causes a lot of water quality problems downstream beyond just the soil loss. And finally, here's another unhealthy stream buffer, again with livestock grazing pressure. So we've got a situation where livestock had full access to the stream. You can see a place where they enter into the stream, and that repetition of foot traffic is creating erosion on the bank itself, plus the fact that they've clipped the vegetation, they've eaten that grass right to the surface, and so there's very little root structure to hold the soil in place. So when we're thinking about establishing buffer zones, one of the primary things to think about is how wide of a buffer that you want to establish. And the width of the buffer is going to determine what benefits we get from the buffer. So I kind of feel like the wider the buffer you'll give me, the more I will take. However, I understand that that's not realistic. And in some cases, if you give up 15, 20 feet on either side of the stream, then that's a significant amount of land that is coming out of production. So thinking about what buffer width you can give up, a planting strategy is next. So are you going to let it just grow up on its own, or are you going to plant things on purpose? So are you going to go in and establish trees close to the edge? Are you going to put shrubs in? Or are you going to sow native grasses and forbs, that kind of thing? You also need a maintenance strategy. So how are you going to maintain the area? And you can't just walk away from an area and think that, oh, nature will take its course and everything will be fine and it'll work out, great. You can stop mowing. That's a good strategy. But you need to think about things like, if you don't mow, what's going to come in? Is it going to be grasses? Is it going to be trees? Or is it maybe going to be invasive plants or weeds that you don't want? So you want to make sure you have a plan for how you'll maintain the buffer. You can mow the buffer 1 to 2 times a year to manage out woody species. So typically we may have cedar that will come in. And so if we want to mow a couple times a year, it's totally acceptable. Being strategic about when you do that mowing is important, but you can keep the woody vegetation down. You can also think about mowing in strips. So you could do it on a 3-year rotation where you're going to mow a certain portion every 3 years. That's also going to help reduce any kind of pressure from woody species. Really, it boils down to, what is your tolerance for it? Do you have desires for how it should visually look? And what is your tolerance for maybe what your neighbor might say? I know that a lot of times we get pressures from outside and off the farm from family members or friends or neighbors about, how we manage certain things. But making sure that you're making those decisions on a scientific basis and what's best for your operation is really important. So if you can tolerate a little wild and woolly look on your stream buffers, you're going to get some benefits in the long run. So again, I talked about the buffer width will determine what benefits we get from the buffer. And so this graphic just shows us, and I have an arrow pointing to the width of a buffer for stream bank stabilization and helping the aquatic food web is only 10 feet, at the minimum of 10 feet. So if you can handle a 10-foot buffer on your stream banks, then you can start to get water quality and soil conservation benefits from establishing a buffer. So as little as 10 feet on both sides of the stream can really start to add up towards some of those benefits of installing buffers on your streams. So really encourage you to think about implementing and utilizing stream buffers to protect your water resources and prevent erosion. Thank you.